Number 10. Wolverine Snikt. Back in the early 2000s, Marvel made a very interesting foray into manga. It honestly did not go very well for them, but one of the most interesting of the stories to come out of it would have to be Wolverine Snikt. Japanese manga artist Tsutomu Nihai, sorry if I mispronounced that, created Blame, then this series before moving on to work on Biomega and Knights of Sidonia. His art style is radically different from anything else Marvel has. It's smooth, yet gritty with sharp edges and awesome action. Not to mention, it's kinda creepy. Wolverine is also decidedly quieter in this story. Essentially, the story places Wolverine in a post-apocalyptic world, transported through time by a young girl who is one of the last remaining humans in a world where a virus has mutated into destructive mechanical foes called the Mandate. Now Logan, naturally, is humanity's last hope, since his adamantium claws are the only thing that can destroy the cores inside the Mandate and potentially the one that creates all the rest, the primogenitor. It's not exactly unique in terms of story, but almost everything else about it stands apart from anything else we have seen from Marvel, especially during that time. Number 9. Doom's Revenge. After the beginning of Dark Reign and Dr. Doom being released from prison, he heads home to Latveria, and he eagerly awaits the return of his master, a guy called the Marquis of Death. The Marquis shows up with his mysterious new apprentice in tow and slowly seems to gauge Doom before asking him if he thinks he's been as dangerous as the Marquis trained him to be. Doom says yes, but the Marquis seems to disagree. He thinks that Doom has wasted his opportunity and tries to punish him for it. The next issue is a battle between Doom and the Marquis, but in the end, it turns out that the Marquis is much more powerful than anyone thought and was just messing with Doom's perception of reality, making it so that he believes that it is 5 years in the future and Doom has led all the heroes of the Earth to defeat the Marquis, and now Doom is married to the Invisible Woman and is about to have a child with her. That was all an illusion created by the Marquis just to be cruel to Dr. Doom. He then sets Doom on fire, turns his heart to stone and his blood to acid, and deposits Doom's dying body into a time machine and drops him millions of years ago in the mouth of a megalodon. The Fantastic Four fight with the Marquis for the next 2 issues, finally figuring out a way to defeat the Marquis of Death, and it's at that point that the Marquis' new mysterious apprentice, who I just talked about, reveals himself to be Dr. Doom in disguise this whole time. He's lived 1,000,000 years just to get back to this point in time so that he could gain his revenge, which he does, impressing the Marquis in the process. Number 8. Punisher Max. Punisher Max was an adult comic, and for a guy whose main thing is ushering people to the pearly gates, it does make sense that this setting suits his character best. Removing the Punisher from all the costumes and the superpowers of the regular Marvel universe and dropping him right into an America facing the early days of the War on Terror, it kicked off with the CIA trying to recruit Frank, which sets off a violent political game. This Frank Castle was a veteran of the Cold War, running Black Ops alongside Nick Fury in Vietnam, and he is not someone you want to mess around with. He soft deletes microchip during the very first storyline just for helping the CIA to even find him. His enemies here are also much more threatening and scarily realistic compared to anything that Earth 616 has thrown at the Punisher, with a big shout out to Barracuda, another former soldier just as ruthless and skilled as Frank is. Punisher Max shows the very real physical and emotional damage that Frank Castle's crusade would actually cause him in real life, obviously with a tiny suspension of disbelief that comes with it being a comic book. If you choose to give it a read though, just be warned, it is extremely graphic. Number 7. X-23's Origin. X-23's origin story was told in the 2004 miniseries X-23 Innocence Lost, which takes Laura Kinney from conception to independence, and man does she go through the ringer. Laura, unlike most of the other mutants, was created in a lab. This lab was called the Facility, and it's where attempts were being made to clone Wolverine/Weapon X from a recovered sample of his DNA. The problem is that the sample was incomplete, resulting in constant failures. It was the work of brilliant geneticist Sarah Kinney that finally made the project a success when she combined her own DNA with that of the sample to create a genetic replica with near identical powers to the original Wolverine. This clone became labeled X-23, but Sarah secretly named her Laura. X-23 was trained from birth to be an assassin, treated fairly extremely and exposed to a trigger scent that would cause her to lose all control and give in to a brutal rage. The organization used this trigger scent to have her wipe out her sensei, as well as to make money off of her as an 11-year-old super assassin. Eventually, her mother realized that she needed to free Laura. She also learned that the facility has created more clones, intending to train them in the same way, and she decides that she has to take them out. Thanks to Sarah, X-23 manages to destroy the facility and the clones, but as she escapes, she discovers that the facility have put the trigger scent on her mom. Sarah ends up being taken out by Laura herself, passing away in her arms before X-23 finally escapes. Number 6. The Reigning. After the passing of Odin at the hands of Surtur during Dan Jurgens' 1998 to 2004 run on Thor, Thor ends up becoming king of Asgard, and, well, Thor ends up being a pretty bad king. He is harsh, lacks patience, and he makes some really questionable choices with the Odin force power that he now wields. Choices like going off fighting frost giants, getting together with Amora the Enchantress of all people, and in a really odd move, Thor decides that Asgard should invade Earth. Thor uses the resources at Asgard's command to try and forcibly solve all of Earth's problems. Instead of trying to lead humans to be better, he just solves our problems, and while there is a lot of good done by that, a lot of people are resistant to this. A coalition of different countries stage an attack against Asgard, destroying both it and New York City, pushing Thor even further into becoming a sort of dictator. He failed the Koran Kata, which is the test of character put in place by the Council of Godheads, and if that weren't enough, Thor eventually becomes unworthy of Mjolnir when he takes the life of Jake Olsen. He gains religious followers, makes enemies of his friends, and fights and imprisons other Avengers, but he does indeed become the ruler of Earth over the next 200 years, only to reverse it all when he realized how he was still a failure in the eyes of his new son. Number 5. DC vs. Marvel. The 90s were a rough time for comics in general, but especially with DC and Marvel. To help fight flagging sales, the company staged a crossover that saw their universes get all mashed together. The 1996 series called simply DC vs. Marvel did exactly what it claimed to do. Heroes and villains across both universes ended up facing off. Storm faced off against Wonder Woman, Superman fought the Hulk, and for whatever reason, Robin faced Jubilee. I don't know. DC vs. Marvel was a shameless fan service, and no one cared because it was awesome. Sure, it wasn't particularly that well written or drawn, but whatever. All the outcomes of each match were decided by fans, which resulted in some kind of very strange victories, I'm gonna be honest. The notable thing about DC vs. Marvel is how singular it is in history. A crossover like it hadn't happened before, and it probably will never happen again. But I, for one, am just glad it happened at all. And now those comics exist forever for everyone to enjoy whenever they want. Number 4. Time runs out, or the incursions. So, during Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, these things called incursions started to happen, orchestrated by the Beyonders. Essentially, two multiverses would crash together, destroying them both, and the focal point for that crash was the Earth itself. When the incursions started to threaten the multiverse, Namor the Submariner had a different view from the rest of the Illuminati, and during the incursion with Earth 4290001, Namor destroyed that Earth to save both universes and save his own Earth. When the next incursion presented itself right after, the Illuminati were going to just let it happen instead of destroying an entire planet. Standing against that, Namor teamed up with Maximus the Mad of the Inhumans, and then together they freed the prisoners of the Illuminati, which included the Black Order and Thanos, plus some insanely powerful additions. And they are very powerful. This group of villainous powerhouses were sanctioned by the United Nations to destroy the alternate Earths that appeared during incursions. Now, while Namor had planned to use an explosion to destroy the other Earth, Thanos, who pretty much took control of the group, led them in what was basically a complete and utter slaughter. And ultimately, that was for nothing because the incursions happened anyways, pretty much ending this version of the multiverse and bringing us the new Secret Wars. Number 3. Original Sin. Jason Aaron's Original Sin has a rather simple start. It begins with a murder investigation, and then it just throws everything under the sun at the heroes, making a huge splash. The inciting passing of Original Sin is Uatu the Watcher, an incredibly shocking character to be unceremoniously wiped out. Now, various teams of heroes try to search for the culprit, and they uncover some pretty shocking truths, but most of those truths have very little to do with Uatu's death. Uatu's name of the Watcher is literal. He sits up on the moon and just watches everything throughout time. Uatu's eyes contain all the knowledge in the world, and that was what he was taken off the plane for. Uatu's eyes are stolen after his passing, and that results in pretty much everyone's secrets coming out and chaos just reigning. Thor loses the worthiness to wield his hammer, Professor X's will was discovered, and that's just the beginning. By the end of the story, it's revealed that a much older version of Nick Fury was behind all the madness. He wiped out Uatu for the knowledge of his eyes, and he has been secretly pulling strings in the universe for years, using life model decoys of himself to appear to the heroes as a much younger man. Number 2, the Eternal Max. Okay, so this comic is just weird. Most of the comics today have been weird, but trust me. So being a Marvel Max comic, we have to 1. Forget everything we know about the main Marvel universe, and 2. Be prepared for a lot of graphic scenes with a lot of nudity. Essentially, the Eternal Max follows the Eternals, but other than being the immortal servants of the Celestials, these guys are quite different. Taking place just before the dawn of mankind, the Eternals had been serving the Celestials for thousands of years, traveling from planet to planet to mine its resources. When the Eternals arrive on a planet, they genetically modify some of the local intelligent life into artificial Eternals, which they call deviants, and they use them as manual labor to make the job easier. When they arrive on Earth, they do the same thing, turning the proto-humans into deviants, but these deviants are shockingly similar to these Eternals. Now, in the past, the Celestials wiped out every single one of the female Eternals in order to force the male Eternals into servitude. So, when these new deviants were created, the male Eternals get all googly-eyed for the female deviants. A large number of the Eternals go against the rules to teach the deviants how to communicate, and they begin to procreate with them. This leads to essentially a mini civil war among the Eternals between their leader, Ikedan, and the second in command, Crassus. It all leads into the Eternals and these deviants basically becoming the first real humans on Earth. At least that's how I interpret it. If you're over the age of 18, give it a read and interpret it yourself. Number 1, Ultimate Universe Apocalypse. Apocalypse in the Ultimate Universe is actually quite strange. When Apocalypse first showed up here, he was actually a vision or apparition who would only be seen by the schizophrenic Mr. Sinister. This Lord Apocalypse that seemed to live only inside Sinister's head and as a stuffed effigy apparently made Sinister his herald and gave Sinister a mission to take the lives of 10 innocent mutants in order to bring about Apocalypse's manifestation. Now, Sinister managed to accomplish a lot of these on his own, but he finished off the rest when he launched an attack on the Morlocks in their own home, which is when the X-Men arrived. As his final offering to Apocalypse, Sinister took the life of Angel, even though the X-Men tried their best to stop this. Having completed his mission, Sinister then just rose up into the air and then up to the surface of New York, where he physically transformed into Apocalypse himself. Turns out, he was not crazy at all. Not by a long shot, as Apocalypse proved more than capable of taking on the X-Men and the Morlocks with his ability to steal other mutant powers and disable them. He ripped the arm off of Wolverine and caused the mutants in the city to all begin attacking each other. The Fantastic Four showed up, but were attacked by the controlled X-Men, and eventually, thanks to a carefully thought out plan by Cable and Bishop, plus some intervention by Jean Grey as the Phoenix Force, a complete catastrophe was avoided and Apocalypse was defeated. Number 10, the Fantastic Four as cosmonauts. Let's explore the what-if story that begs the question of what if the Fantastic Four were Russian? Well, for starters, their names are different. In fact, they're pretty much all different. Now the UFFF, or the Ultimate Federalist Freedom Fighters, the team is made up of Rudion Richards, the commie Reed Richards, who instead of stretching can just pop off his limbs and send them out over long distances, which is way more alarming. Natalia Romanova, the 616 Black Widow, who is now Widowmaker and can control electromagnetic energy. Pyotr Rasputin, who is still just Colossus and has all those powers except his body and mind are deteriorating over time. And lastly, Pyotr's sister, Ilyana Rasputina, who seems to have the power of Sue Storm, but we only ever see her go invisible, which is way less cool than the 616 continuity. After the demise of Stalin, the team is put under KGB control, and Rudd Richards, easily the strangest member of this team, is not having it, especially after he accidentally ends the life of Giant Man while on a mission for them. Widowmaker then makes widows of the wives of the leaders of the KGB, and the superhero team goes on to fight for freedom and equality. I didn't think that's how it would go, but here we are. Number 9, World War II Space Nick Fury. 1979's What If number 14 gives us a very different approach to history. Instead of World War II being fought in Europe, it's instead fought in space. In this alternate timeline, we discovered interstellar travel much earlier in our history, and as such, the World War II that we fight is more like space sector war between Sector Alpha and Sector Beta in space. And don't ask me to define where those areas are because I can't. It doesn't even tell us. As this is still all set at the same general time as the regular World War II, some of the same characters are gonna be involved, including the original Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos. This story has new high-tech weaponry, fishbowl helmets, and aliens. It's a good bit of fun. Now we learn in the story that Admiral von Strucker is actually working with the alien Axis powers to create a quote master race. So it seems in this alternate world we can master interstellar travel, but we still can't just accept each other's differences. Number 8, Miles Morales becomes Wolverine? In this what if, we don't really get an explanation as to why, but instead of being his normal self, Miles Morales in this world is instead a mutant with the same abilities as Wolverine. And when he is younger, he is abducted alongside other children by Weapon X, who turn him into the adamantium skeleton super weapon, just like the original Wolverine, because of course that's what happens. Now fast forward a few years though, now in this world, Sentinels are being used to hunt down mutants by S.H.I.E.L.D. And after Miles takes out 3 of them, S.H.I.E.L.D. sends in this super cool looking warrior wielding an adamantium katana to take him out. This awesome S.H.I.E.L.D. warrior turns out to be Miles' father, and once he discovers this Wolverine mutant is his son, he turns on S.H.I.E.L.D. So obviously they send another assassin, Miles' uncle Aaron, the original bad guy, who seems to be doomed to be bad no matter what because he is this world's version of Sabretooth. Miles' father defends his son to his dying breath until Miles jumps in to beat Sabretooth to a pulp and almost ends him before his father convinces him not to and to instead be a hero. And then the X-Men show up to recruit Miles, led by Professor X, who is actually Genki Lee, the original Miles' best friend for some reason. It's weird, but it's cool. Number 7, Iron Man the Traitor. In one of the first ever what ifs, when Iron Man is famously captured and forced to create weapons, he still creates the Iron Man armor, but the change comes when instead of booting up and busting his way out of where he is being held captive, the boot up sequence takes just a bit too long and Yinsen's sacrifice doesn't buy Tony enough time. Tony is found and restrained before he can do anything. Now that he has been found and this new weapon, the Iron Man armor, is discovered, the leader of the terror organization, Chen Lu, plants a device in the arc reactor that keeps Tony alive, but that allows him to shut it off remotely if Tony doesn't do what he says. And he implants a communication device in Tony's skull so that Chen Lu can spy on and control Tony. Then he lets him be discovered and sets him free. Now thanks to the fact that he can now control Tony, he forces him to become a hero like he would have anyways, gain the trust of the superhero community, and then he learns secrets pertaining to S.H.I.E.L.D. But it's once Tony is ordered to dispatch Reed Richards and goes to complete the mission that it's revealed that Tony had been recording a tape by speaking incredibly slowly, and he sent that tape to Reed, who, when he played it at a faster speed because he's super smart, he learned of the situation that Iron Man was in. Once their fight began, Iron Man eventually got, quote, incapacitated by Reed, who actually helped him remove the device inside Tony's heart, giving Tony the chance to get his revenge. Now for a short and somewhat silly what-if story, it's actually really good. Number 6, New Fantastic Four. What If This Was the Fantastic Four is a comic that was a tribute to illustrator Mike Wieringo, who unexpectedly passed away while working on this story. And even if that wasn't the case, it's still actually one of my favorite what ifs. The original Fantastic Four is brought to an end by the Skrull agent Delilah, and in their place, a team of 4 other heroes step up to the plate, if not with a bit of reluctance. Spider-Man, Wolverine, the Incredible Hulk, and Ghost Rider. Now Ben Grimm was the only member of the original team who survived, and at their funeral, he gave this new team his blessing while he went off to raise Franklin Richards. This new team came under attack from cosmic beings who seemed to sense that the Earth lost one of its major teams, but this was all orchestrated by Dr. Doom, as I'm sure no one is too surprised by. Thanks to Ghost Rider's inclusion on this team, Mephisto uses Doom and possesses him, and creates a team of the hero's villains who are power boosted with infernal magic. It's Venom, Abomination, Sabretooth, and Sandman. This fearsome four, as they call themselves, do battle with the new team of Fantastic Four members, eventually being defeated, revealing the Mephisto-possessed Doom, who almost destroys the team until he's stopped by a combined effort of the citizens of New York, and Spider-Man, utilizing the disruptor that finished off the Fantastic Four in the first place, saves the people of New York, saves Dr. Doom, and he saves the day, because it's Spider-Man. Number 5, Man-Spider. Okay, so in this story, everything that happens to Spider-Man is exactly the same. Oh, except I left out the extremely important detail that in What If number 8 in 1978, this isn't Peter Parker, it's actually Webster Weaver, an anthropomorphized spider in a world of other animal people. Oh, yes, and he gets bit by a radioactive human, giving this spider the proportional powers of a human. Apart from that, and the villains being hilarious alternate versions like Marvin the Hunter, Culture Vulture, Rude Rhino, the Green Gobbler, King Pig, Octodoctopus, and Leaping Lizard, everything is just the same as it always is, until one day Reyes, the bug spray baron, threatened to destroy the ozone layer unless he was given $1 trillion. It turns out that Reyes is actually the guy who defeated Webster's Uncle Ben, or Uncle Bug as he's called in this comic. Man-Spider saves the day, Reyes is destroyed, and he swings back home to Aunt Mayfly. It's lovely. Number 4, the Fantastic Four with different powers. The Fantastic Four are known as the first family of Marvel Comics. Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Johnny Storm, and Ben Grimm combine great intelligence, sterling courage, and a staggering array of powers, making them one of the most powerful superhero teams in comics, and also one of the best families around. 1977's What If number 6 shakes things up by reimagining a world where the four acquire different sets of powers. This sets them on a dramatically divergent path. The story sees Reed, Susan, Johnny, and Ben subjected to the cosmic radiation that fans know gives them their powers, but this time around, Johnny becomes a living robot, Ben sprouts giant dragon wings, and Susan gains the ability to stretch her body to great lengths like Reed could. Reed? Well, he kinda draws the short straw. He's transformed into a bodiless brain. The explorers band together as the Fantastic Four, but Reed's nature as a disembodied organ kinda leads to some problems, as you might suspect. Susan grows closer to Ben instead of Reed, and Reed despairs of ever getting her to love him again. Dr. Doom soon takes advantage of Reed's state by stealing him away for his own ends. Now, after a thrilling battle, Reed and the others manage to overcome Doom. Reed also manages to transfer his mind into Doom's body somehow. This means this new Fantastic Four consists of a winged Ben Grimm, stretchable Susan Storm, metallic Johnny, and Reed alive in the body of Dr. Doom. Kinda crazy. Number 3, Wolverine Punisher. What about the What If where Wolverine became a kind of Punisher? In this story, we're in 1920s Canada following a Wolverine who doesn't seem to actually have claws, or if he does, he barely uses them. He does seem to have his healing factor and senses though. Whatever his powers are, we find out he has a son with a lady who, works at a bar. He is forced to take responsibility for both of them and makes friends with the barkeep. But that all comes to an end when they are all brought to an end thanks to a fire caused by a man named Scarface who fled to Chicago. Now obviously Logan isn't going to just let that go. He tracks down the villain, and with the help of his friend, and all while wearing a skull and crossbone flags on his chest, he wields big bang booms and never pops his claws if he actually has any, but he looks totally amazing as he takes that guy out. It's also an incredibly weird twist on a version of Punisher, but admittedly a little more disappointing than I might have expected it to be, and I'm sorry if you get disappointed by it. Number 2, Hassenwald. Honestly, I'm not even sure how this makes sense, but in this What If comic, Marvel exists as a comic book company that writes all the same comics it normally would, including comic books about Ghost Rider Robbie Reyes, and that's important because he also happens to be an intern at Marvel, but is also still Ghost Rider. I don't know how it works. I never said these things need to make sense. What is honestly even weirder than that though is that the studios of Marvel are being visited by this Nordic death metal band called Hassenwald from Latveria, who have fun clubs all over the world, including in Wakanda. Oh, and they also have been accused of witchcraft, church burning, and eating people, which turns out to be true, as while they are visiting Marvel, they take out the donkey that runs the printing press and use it to create a possessed Ghost Rider comic that turns the world into a hellscape, making them the ultimate rulers of it, using the power of the old gods to do so. I don't know. Now, Robbie Reyes is trapped in this world where Hassenwald has dispatched the Marvel Universe and he needs to save it, I think? I don't know. After reading it though, I needed to sit down, so. And finally, in at number 1, Thanos joins the Avengers. In 2015's What If Infinity Thanos #1, we meet a version of the Mad Titan who willingly teams up with the Avengers to take down the Builders, a race of super beings from another reality who wish to end the universe. Of course, Thanos' desire to become one of the Avengers ultimately turns out to be self-serving, but Captain America realizes this too late and he falls in battle to the Purple Menace. Thanos tells the other Avengers that Cap passed at the hands of the enemy, which the other Avengers accepted. He becomes a solid part of the team, albeit one kept hidden from the rest of humanity. Now, Thanos' mere presence appears to infect the other heroes with this kind of evil persona. In the story's epilogue, we see Tony Stark, Reed Richards, and Doctor Strange mulling over the possibility of beings like the Builders attacking them again. Now, this is when Thanos makes his presence known once more. He offers to help Earth's heroes destroy other worlds in the name of defending their own, kind of like in the Incursions. Kind of a downer. Number 10, Norman Osborn with the Infinity Gauntlet. In the What If Infinity Dark Reign story, Norman Osborn, after becoming the director of Hammer and the Dark Avengers after the Civil War event, figures out how to get his hands on the Infinity Gauntlet, defeating the Illuminati and all the heroes and becoming the Goblin King. Now, using the Gauntlet, he creates a world completely under his own tyrannical rule, and he teleports his horrible and aggressive father from the past to show him all the things that he has accomplished in a really sad attempt to get his father's love and admiration, something he never really had as a child and still doesn't even have it now. His father begins to bash him for becoming a tyrannical ruler, which is a little worse given the fact that it was kind of his father's fault that Norman even turned out this way. Teleporting them both back to the Dark Avengers base, Norman finds out that the entire team has been destroyed. As Norman is trying to figure out what happened, it's revealed that Thanos has shown up to collect the gauntlet in his awesome Thanos fashion. Unfortunately, not even the Mad Titan is a match for someone wielding the gauntlet, and he is dispatched, but not before he warns Norman that he is trying to get the love of someone who he will never get it from. His father. After Thanos is gone, Norman's father, being forced by Norman and the Infinity Stones, begins to tell Norman how great he is, and Osborn just kinda loses it, wiping his father from all existence, all time, and all space. Which was dumb, because now Norman Osborn's existence is a paradox and he, and this world that he created, fade into nothing. Number 9, all the power, no responsibility. In this What If number 19, Peter Parker makes the simple decision of stopping the robber who would go on to take Uncle Ben's life all the way back when he first encountered him and canonically did nothing. That simple change of the story robs Peter of the lesson of great power means great responsibility, and instead he turns to a life in the public eye. Now as an actor, Peter turns his focus towards making films and protecting his reputation at almost any cost. He becomes the publicist for both the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, as well as Daredevil, all while still retaining his Spider-Man persona. He even gets a cool cape for a tiny little bit. I mean, it's cool to me, I don't know. It's really not that cool. When J. Jonah Jameson exposes him to the public though, we see quite a bit more of an edge to this Spider-Man. Spider-Man threatens him and even eventually ends his career, which comes back to bite Peter when Jonah forms the Sinister Six, including himself. It's only after Daredevil jumps in to save Peter and fight the villains that Peter does actually learn the old power and responsibility thing. Number 8, what if Aunt May passed on instead of Uncle Ben? Ready to be depressed? Great, because in this What If story we are given a first-hand look at what happens to Peter if Aunt May was the one to lose her life instead of Uncle Ben. Peter, fueled by rage, goes after her killer and ends his life, but unexpectedly Uncle Ben shows up and he takes the fall for Peter, going to jail. Now, Peter is going through life with no real moral center to help guide him, and he hates the idea of being Spider-Man. He becomes a bit of a troubled kid, he goes to a juvenile prison, escapes, lives on the street, and when he is almost at his breaking point, he tries to break Uncle Ben out of prison. Now instead of going with him, Uncle Ben convinces Peter to make Aunt May proud. Peter takes it to heart, he fixes his life, he meets Mary Jane, he focuses on school, being a hero when the world really needs him, and eventually Ben gets out of prison on good behavior, and that's when we finally get the power and responsibility speech, which leads to Peter becoming Spider-Man more permanently, and with Uncle Ben as like a Spider-Man version of Bruce Wayne's Alfred. He goes on to become the hero that New York deserves. Nice. Number 7, intelligent design God Hulk. Most comic book readers, and especially fans of Marvel and the Hulk, know of the storyline where the Illuminati banished the Hulk from Earth to send him to another planet. Now he ended up crash landing on Sakaar and became a gladiator, turned liberator, turned ruler of the planet until his ship self-destructed, wiping out his family and bringing him back to Earth as one of the most powerful and angry versions of the Hulk ever. Well, in What If If Planet Hulk, it ends up asking the question, what if the Illuminati's banishment had hit its original target? Because of an unforeseen anomaly and Bruce kind of losing his mind, in the main Marvel universe, Hulk was thrown off of his original course, which is what got him wound up on Sakaar in the first place. In this story, Hulk lands on the incredibly peaceful and serene planet that he was intended to, and sure, he goes a bit ragey at first, but he eventually realizes the planet is inhabited by a race of peaceful tiny little creatures, and they're super cute. Over long periods of time, the Hulk helps this race to evolve and survive against the threats of this planet, and even become a thriving civilization kinda similar to humans. They end up viewing the Hulk as their god, and he basically acts as one, leading them to wealth and prosperity and keeping them safe. Number 6. The world knew Daredevil was blind. One day, when fighting against Electro with Spider-Man, Daredevil is unaffected by a blinding flare set off right in front of his face by Electro. Now this event kinda clues in Electro to the idea that maybe this Daredevil guy is kinda blind. And when Electro and Spider-Man ask Daredevil what color Electro's costume is, it kinda seals the deal. Electro lets the whole world know by leaking this info to the Daily Bugle after Spider-Man actually sorta makes fun of Daredevil, which is mean, saying it makes sense why he chose the yellow costume because he obviously couldn't see how bad it was. Damn, Spider-Man. The villains then begin to take advantage of this massive secret weakness for Daredevil, and while he is able to hold his own still, he eventually decides to undergo an experimental treatment that restores his sight but removes his super senses. Now, powerless, Matt Murdock and Karen Page get married and have a normal life, with Matt becoming the district attorney. So it did actually turn out pretty good in the end. Number 5. Dazzler, the Herald of Galactus. Dazzler in Marvel Comics is a super underrated mutant and mega pop star with the power to convert sound into light, which is pretty good for a musician, and especially so since she uses this power to literally dazzle people at her concerts, as well as fight bad guys with a surprising level of power and efficiency. Well, in What If number 33, Dazzler is chosen as the new Herald of Galactus, being apparently the only being who could retrieve the old Herald who had hidden himself in a black hole. Now Dazzler does this by using her light-based powers, and then Galactus just sends him back into the black hole as like a punishment, I think? It's kind of weird, but this is a What If comic, so just go with it. Dazzler was then given a huge boost with the power Cosmic, and for some reason, even with her new boosted up powers, she decides to keep the disco ball rollerblades. I don't know. She's actually really torn up about having to leave her world, but she does vow to at least do good by not letting Galactus eat inhabited planets, which Galactus actually obliges this time because it seems like he's kinda got the hots for Dazzler. I'm not joking, that's actually kind of the reason. There's a whole conflict with an armada, and then Galactus releases her to go back to Earth, which has been the victim of an apocalypse in her absence, and then she decides to go back to join him yet again as some kind of weird, twisted love story. It's really strange. Number 4. Thaddeus Hulk Ross. So it turns out that if Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross were the one to save Rick Jones from the Gamma Bomb all the way back when, and became irradiated and became the Hulk, he wouldn't last very long, like at all. That's what happens in What If General Ross had become the Hulk. Gamma affects everyone differently, as the Watcher tells us, and for the General, he immediately turned into a Hulk, but retained his intelligence only without being able to speak or handle the situations he was now in properly, like the intelligence was all internal. For example, he accidentally completely squashed Rick Jones. He stopped Igor, the Russian spy who caused the Gamma explosion, but caused untold damage in the process, and while fighting the military, he threw a tank that traveled all the way to the house of Betty Ross, his daughter. The tank he threw crushed the house with Betty inside. He then unknowingly went to find her, as she would be able to help him with the Hulk problem, but all he found was the result of what he had done, and a weeping Bruce Banner. Ross transforms back into his regular human form, which allows Bruce to end the life of this now tormented Ross. This one's kind of depressing. Sorry. Number 3. American Civil War Captain America. I've talked about this one a lot, and I'm sorry. The story of What If Captain America starts out with our Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes time displaced to the Civil War era. Bucky is the commander of their regiment, and he is not a good guy. Apart from being an unhealthy amount of racist, he has quite the lack of moral compass as well. Now our Steve Rogers here obviously starts out as his scrawny and less than impressive self, but with a heart of gold that shines through. Now after sustaining injuries from not following Bucky's dastardly orders, he is recovering in a nearby Union camp tended to by one Private Samuel Wilson, this timeline's version of the Falcon, taken in by the Shawnee tribe at a very young age. Sensing the goodness in Steve's heart, Wilson bestows a kind of eagle animal spirit thing on Mr. Rogers that changes you on the outside to whatever you are on the inside, if that makes any sense. And this happens just as James Barnes bursts into their location to bring them down. Now the power of this ritual blasts Barnes away, and when he recovers, he has become the White Skull, with like literally, he's the skull. And Steve has become a mystical super soldier wielding a shield and sporting a headdress. Now he goes on to save presidents and wars and leave a lasting legacy of Captain and General Americas that continues all the way up until the modern day. Number 2. Ghost Stroller Rider. What If the Watcher was a stand-up comedian is honestly the What If comic that just keeps on giving. It's pretty awesome. There are tons of weird and wild parts in this comic, but for this point, there is a full page devoted to the question of what if the Ghost Rider had possessed someone other than Johnny Blaze. And of course, instead of finding some other able-bodied man or woman, a cigarette-smoking, leather vest-wearing comedian watcher shows us the spirit of vengeance inhabiting the body of an elderly woman in a wheelchair demanding warm milk, a rollerblade-wearing woman vowing to bring an end to disco, and an infant in a stroller. A big-headed goo-goo gaga who will hunt for vengeance after it finds someone to change its diaper. And just to make it 10 times better, this wee bab is wielding a cat, swinging it around its head as it zooms around in its Hellfire stroller. I honestly can't make it up, it's actually on the page. And finally, in at number 1, it's heroic Dr. Doom. What would a good guy version of one of the strongest, most quotable, and most villainous villains in the pages of Marvel Comics look like? Well, other than the infamous Iron Man, in issue 22 of What If, we get to see just that. When the Victor Von Doom of this universe discovers Reed Richards looking over his experimental notes, uninvited in university, he diverts from the regular continuity, which normally sees Doom fly off into a rage and make Reed leave. Instead, Von Doom invites Reed Richards to help him out, which I think a true scientist would actually do. Now with Reed's help, Victor is able to contact his mother in the afterlife, and he learns of his royal blood. He trains in the advanced technology and mystical arts of an order of monks in Tibet and in the darkest places of sorcery, and is granted, instead of his classic armor, this really sweet golden armor, which is kind of evocative of like medieval knights, but also kind of like the Roman Empire a little bit. Or maybe that's just my male brain talking, I don't know. He uses his knowledge to free his mother's soul from the realm of Mephisto, and uses his technology and sorcery to free his kingdom from an oppressive ruler, and all goes really well. Until Mephisto comes back demanding the soul of his lover, Valeria, in exchange for the freedom of his people. Then he battles Mephisto once every year to try and save his love, similar to how he does the same for his mother in the normal continuity, only now he's widely seen as a hero.
Number 10. What if Daredevil killed the Kingpin? That's exactly what happened in issue number 2 of the 1989 series. Following the events of Born Again in this alternate reality, Matt Murdock loses his mind, driven insane as a result of being tormented by Wilson Fisk, which honestly makes sense to me. I know I would be driven insane if all of that stuff happened to me. This causes Matt to take the fight directly to Kingpin, who he simply takes out by shooting him. After this detail is exposed, everyone is basically on his trail, including Punisher and Spider-Man. When Matt goes to beg for Richard Fisk, Wilson's son's, forgiveness, even Hobgoblin gets involved in this fray. While Matt ultimately dies in the fight protecting Richard from Hobgoblin, Richard, in an unexpected twist, ends up carrying on the Daredevil legacy. Which I guess shouldn't be too unexpected if you know about, 2099, where it's kind of what happens in 2099. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why don't you show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9. What if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? Now, you'd think this would actually be one of the happier what if stories, considering when Spider-Man started out, this was actually like one of his dreams to join the FF team, but he was denied it. However, in this universe, they do decide to allow Spider-Man to join them, making his dreams come true, but it actually ends up worse than if they just refused him like they did in the main continuity. I also think that this first issue of What If is pretty important, as it really sets the tone for what these hypothetical comic stories could be, a look into a much darker reality where not everything goes according to plan. But we don't have to really deal with the consequences long term, because these stories are like windows into other more distant worlds, so they don't affect our main world. We can kind of just see like, I wonder what that world would be like. like terrible? Yep. In issue number 1 of the first volume of What If, Spider-Man ends up joining the Fantastic Four team, which I believe they renamed themselves to the Fantastic Five. Still has a pretty good ring to it actually. When Susan Storm actually makes the suggestion that, maybe letting him join wouldn't be such a bad idea, so Sue is actually the one that kind of gets him on the team ultimately here. But in the end, this results in her feeling often left out, shunted from this team as a result of Spider-Man's impressive presence. He just completely outdoes Sue, so she feels pretty left out. This causes her in the end to choose to remain with Namor, ultimately leaving the Fantastic Five team, something for which Spider-Man blames himself and which leaves a massive hole in the team and a massive hole in Reed's heart. Number 8. What if Spider-Man became a murderer? This is maybe the brightest of the darkest what if stories that I have on this list, but it's still really dark, so hence why it's here, especially at the start here. In issue number 72 of the 1989 What If series, we answer the question, what if Spider-Man became a murderer? Dun dun dun! With him confronting the burglar who killed his Uncle Ben and losing control of his emotions, killing said burglar in turn. This, however, eats Peter up inside, and it isn't until Dr. Kurt Connors becomes the Lizard and decides to fess up to his own actions that Peter is actually inspired and is able to confess to the murder that he was responsible for and reveal that he is the one that's Spider-Man. He does some time, but thanks to him showing remorse, he only gets 5 years, and Aunt May is still waiting for him when he gets out with his costume. It's dark, but it's also kind of cute in the end, because I think one of his biggest concerns was that Aunt May would never love him again, and she is upset, but she eventually gets over it, and she's like, well, this is still my nephew, so kinda nice. Still terrible, but kinda nice. Number 7. What if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? This one actually comes to us from a comic titled What If?, starring Daredevil, the man without fear. But the question posed in the intro is, what if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? Which is that's why I named the point that. It might not seem as dark as some other tales in the what if category, but the intro literally also poses the question in this issue. What if we shed a little light on the dark side of the Marvel universe? And the story definitely delivers there, I would say. Here, Matt's dad takes the dive for his son and earns the money needed to send him to law school. Sounds pretty good. There, Matt meets Elektra. Also sounds pretty good. The two have a love affair that ends when her father is killed and they're both unable to save him together. Okay, it's starting to turn kinda dark. She leaves and Matt is then forced to deal with his own family tragedy as his father ends up in the hospital after a hit in a fight leaves him comatose. Okay, it's getting darker. Unable to afford the bills, he drops out of school and himself becomes a fighter, but when he is asked to take a dive for a paycheck, he refuses. As punishment, his father is killed, and Elektra returns to encourage Matt to seek retribution. This is where it gets pretty dark, I would say. Matt basically goes after Wilson Fisk with his intention to do it his own way. Now, he doesn't want to kill him, but he just wants to expose him for his illegal business dealings, which is a very Matt Murdock approach, I would say. In the end, though, Elektra kills Fisk for Matt basically during this confrontation, and Matt chooses to incriminate himself in the murder because he feels guilty about Kingpin's death. Yikes. Number 6. What if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by a radioactive spider? This What If comic, issue number 7 from the original series from the 70s, actually has 3 stories in it. In one of them, Flash Thompson tries on the role of superhero as he ends up becoming the one fatefully bitten by the radioactive spider that day in the science lab on the student field trip. And if you're wondering, well, Amanda, Flash Thompson actually has been a hero. I know he's been a hero in the main continuity, but I mean, in this reality, he's trying on the superhero role of Spider-Man. He becomes Spider-Man and does his best to be a great hero, but actually dies during his attempt to be one. Sad. He fights the Vulture, and it's during a battle in the sky where the Vulture successfully manages to kick Flash off of him that Flash's Spider-Man falls to the ground. Unable to find much in the way of cushion or slowing his descent, the fall does him in, and Peter Parker finds Spider-Man in the alleyway, unmasking him to recognize the face of Flash Thompson, the ire of his high school experience. Now acknowledging the fact that Flash was Spider-Man though, Peter seems to forget all about this as he actually mourns the loss of Thompson, which makes it even more sad. Number 5. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? One of my personal favorites and definitely a dark story. This one involves Spider-Man being fully overtaken by his black suit after Reed attempts to remove it. In the end, Peter is drained of his life energy by the suit, which does inevitably leave him. Prematurely aged by this process, he ends up dying of old age, with Black Cat being the one to get revenge for Peter by killing the symbiote for good. It also features a very sad scene between May and old Peter, who poses as a colleague of Peter's from the Daily Bugle and basically comes to tell Aunt May before he dies how much Peter loved her. This sad and tragic what-if tale comes from issue number 4 of the 1989 comic series, if you would like to revisit it, as I have. Number 4. What if the Hulk had killed Wolverine? This story comes to us from issue number 50 of the first volume of the Marvel What If series. Here, Wolverine and the Hulk fight, as, is common, but this time, during their, what I believe is intended to be their first fight, Wolverine ends up dead. This is all because Hulk is being used as a pawn by Forge's powerful nemesis, the Adversary. Very creative name, the Adversary. I wonder what that guy's about. Is he an adversary? He certainly is. In the end, Hulk threatens the lives of pretty much all of the X-Men, but does not end up killing them all. Once the Adversary reveals himself, Hulk attacks him, weakening him briefly, just long enough for Forge and Storm to basically escape his clutches. They strike back against him, and with Forge managing to cast a spell to defeat the Adversary, and basically seals the Adversary off in another realm, banishing him from their reality for good. Still, while there are survivors of this battle, when Hulk transforms back to Bruce Banner, Bruce is confronted with the fact that he has taken multiple lives during this rampage, and that pretty much breaks Bruce, so I would say this is pretty tragic. Number 3. What if the Punisher had killed Spider-Man? This comic has maybe one of the darkest endings around. In it, Punisher is tricked into killing Spider-Man. He's promised basically funds to help him in his fight against crime and those who took his family from him, and Frank is also made to believe that Spider-Man himself is a criminal and is not actually a hero. However, after killing Spider-Man, Frank learns the truth. He manages to track down the man who misguided him, the Jackal, aka Professor Miles Warren. He figures out that the Jackal is Warren, and insists that they wait for the cops instead of just, blowing Warren away. However, when the cops do arrive, it's revealed what Frank's real plan is here, to basically kill the Jackal in front of the cops and in return be killed by the cops, believing he deserves himself to be punished for what he did to poor Spider-Man. This all goes down in What If issue number 58 from the 1989 series. Does seem like a Frank solution to a problem where he blames himself for something. Number 2. What if Flash Thompson became Spider-Man? I was kind of thinking that maybe in this story, Flash, might get a break here. But even here, he has a pretty bleak tale attached to him in another alternate reality where he also becomes Spider-Man instead of Peter Parker. The story culminates in a heated moment where Peter discovers Flash's secret, that he's Spider-Man. Filled with rage, Flash doesn't listen to Peter's pleas for help and instead blames him for everything that has gone wrong in his life recently, shouting at Peter, "You ruined my life," before hitting him with a deadly punch that basically cost Peter his life. This story comes from the 2018 What If Spider-Man comic, and I would recommend checking this one out. It's wild. Number 1. What if Phoenix had not died? The title for this story makes it sound like it might even be a positive and happy story, but don't be misguided, it's not happy. Well, it starts off pretty optimistic with the Phoenix not dying but being redeemed and even helping to defeat Galactus. In the end, the Dark Phoenix power does consume Jean, causing her to turn on her teammates, so she becomes, dark again. She kills not just the X-Men, but the world in her rage and sorrow, with her anger and fire continuing to spread outward, engulfing the universe. So not only do her friends die, the X-Men obviously, the world, but the universe is also completely endangered, so yeah. Number 10. Shame of Thrones. Weird, but in a great way. Because for this story, we are heading over to the alternate reality belonging to the Little Marvels. Over in the Infinity comic Giant Size Little Marvels issue number 4, we get a glimpse into Dr. Von Doom's lair and his evil game night, which apparently happens every other Tuesday, according to Magneto. However, the whole issue consists of a tangent where the invited villains complain that Doom is the only one who gets to sit in a throne while they game, whereas they're all relegated, to normal seats. Doom argues it is because he's the most accomplished ruler among them all, and that he answers to no one. However, his mom has something to say about that. Vicky? Number 9. What if Sergeant Fury had fought World War II in outer space? I was literally going to just say that to introduce the story, but then of course it's already been said because that's the name of the story. In this comic, we get to see what it would be like if, in addition to the general opposition during World War II, there were also aliens involved, who wanted to, of course, invade Earth. As such, the Howling Commandos take to the stars to fight against German World War II soldiers in addition to alien invaders known as the Baytans. Did I also mention that Nick Fury is still smoking throughout this entire issue, even while he's wearing a space helmet? While some things would change in this scenario, it seems others would remain the same. How do you even smoke in a space helmet? That seems like it would be terrible. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more multiversal Marvel lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. The Final Showdown. Mutant X really had a whole series, but for the purpose of this list, we're just going to focus on one of its story arcs that takes place in the alternate reality of Earth 1298, as it was a 32-issue series, so I mean a lot happened. The basic idea here though is that instead of X Factor, we have a non-government or corporate mutant team known as the Six. Havoc in this reality ends up with Madeline Pryor, and the two of them have a child together named Scott. Yeah, it's a little different than 616. Here Maddie does become the Goblin Queen, but like how we have the Phoenix Force, she becomes infected with the Goblin Force and its influence, turning her dark. Initially, Maddie is actually known by her hero mantle, Marvel Woman. As such, Havoc and their son Scotty must fight against the Goblin Queen. After a long build-up where no one is able to stop Madeline, it's revealed that Scotty is able to due to his insane level of power. He rids his mom of the Goblin influence, but also banishes her in the process. Don't worry though, just like in main continuity, Maddie would return here as well. I believe she gets banished to like the center of the earth. It's a weird place, but it's a pretty good place, I would say. Mutant X, should you read it? Nah, I think you should read it. I think you could read it. I don't know if you should, but you definitely could. Number 7. What if the X-Men had lost Inferno? I love this comic, mainly for the panel at the end where Alicia Masters' Storm whispers to her newborn babe, "I love you, baby." I think it might be one of my all-time favorite panels ever, actually. But there is lots of weird stuff to love from this issue, including the fact that Doctor Strange and Rachel Summers also randomly deliver this baby at the end. In this What If, we imagine what would have gone down if the Goblin Queen hadn't been defeated and instead was victorious. One of the things that would have come about? Her unleashing the beast within Wolverine and turning him into a villain who devours babies. Also, Rachel becomes trapped and later freed from being a bridal mannequin? I think that's a thing that happens here. That's definitely looks like what's happening. Also, I love Rachel as a bridal mannequin. And how after she's like, "Thanks, my face hurt, too much smiling." Oh, by the way, Doctor Strange, who frees Rachel, he also gets to wear a cool eye patch in this world. Why? Because he's Doctor Strange. He gets an eye patch. I like it. Everyone should have eye patches. I want an alternate reality where everyone has an eye patch. Number 6. Ghost Racers. This is a series that comes from the Battleworld pocket dimension that was governed by God Emperor Doom. Just like we had the Thor Corps, here we have the Ghost Racers, which is basically like its own category of racing, creating an organization or like even a company out of that set form, like NASCAR. The Ghost Racers are made up of various ghost riders who of course race one another for Battleworld's entertainment. And of course, so wealthy fans can ideally make some funds on the wins and losses of each race. Although all the riders are pitted against one another, and eventually Arcade, who is in charge of them, sends them to take down Robbie Reyes, the current racing champion, eventually they all remember what things were like before Battleworld, and they decide to rise up against those that are controlling them. Which I love. Also, I just love the idea of like just a group of racers that are just all ghost riders, and they're like, we race each other for fun. This is what we do now. Ghost Racers. Number 5. What if Wolverine battled Conan the Barbarian? In issue number 16 of the second volume of What If, we get to see what would happen if Wolverine somehow came to the time and lands of Conan and the duo ended up fighting one another. That's basically what ifs are for, right? Just seeing people that would not normally fight and who will win. In order to revive his love, Conan is asked to bring another soul in her place to sacrifice. The soul that he decides to bring is actually Red Sonja, so that's not great because Wolverine, having fought with Red Sonja previously, had basically kind of fallen for her, and he does not agree with what is going on because of his own sentiment. He wants to rescue Sonja, probably because she reminds him of Jean Grey. Honestly, it's pretty weird to me that no one has ever said that like Jean Grey and Mary Jane Watson look similar, considering people have both thought that they looked like Red Sonja in the comics. So do all women with red hair just look the same? Is that the implication here? Or do all three of these women actually closely resemble one another, but we never really acknowledge that like Jean and MJ like look very similar, like weirdly similar? And Red Sonja's in there too. It's like the trifecta of like redheads. In the end, Wolverine takes Conan's hand in a fight that the two have, and the two end up permanently swapping places, with Conan returning to Wolverine's home reality and Wolverine staying in Conan's age. Wolverine finds a happy ending with Sonja. Conan, not so much. He like sees Jean, and then she goes full Dark Phoenix, and then that's the end of that. Number 4. Age of Ultron vs. Marvel Zombies. Another even more bizarre story coming at us from God Emperor Doom's Battle World. This comic was all about the world that existed outside, actually, of Doom's Battle World, known as the Deadlands. And if you didn't like living by Doom's rules, well, you certainly wouldn't like this. But this might be where you would end up. Defy Doom, and this could be a place that he put you. Age of Ultron vs. Marvel Zombies explored these Deadlands that were watched over by Annihilus' insect creatures. And yeah, it's about as wild as it sounds. Around every corner, with the flip of every page, awaits more gore, folks losing their heads, and monsters, monsters, monsters! I think in a world of zombies versus robots, no one really wins. Is that the takeaway here? Also, because this is Battle World, there are lots of appearances of random multiversal characters, such as young Hank Pym, who's kinda like the main character of this, from the past alternate Earth of 51920, and the Pilgrim Punisher of Earth 15513. At least he looks like a Pilgrim Punisher. I like that he still has his skull shirt though. So he's like got the hat, he's got the coat, and he's like still got this like very 80s style looking logo and shirt. Number 3. Ruins. Ruins is just the most messed up kind of weird that a multiversal story can be. This comic offers a much darker take on what the world could be like with superpowers. Of course, it is a story by Garth Ennis, so yes, darker is definitely where we're going here. As brutal as Ruins is, well, I kinda love how dark and awful it gets. The series deals with the less fantastical, more literal interpretations of powers and their uses, and how less hopeful civilians and government agencies might react or take advantage of said superpowers. In this world, Quicksilver is just a torso with his limbs moving too fast, causing him problems, so they all had to be amputated. At least that's what's implied. Or they just didn't like that he went fast, so they amputated them. The Hulk is an irradiated pile of tumors, which ultimately dies under the weight of his own mutation, and the Silver Surfer ends up driven mad by his own cosmic existence, taking his own life by clawing his own chest open while floating through space. This is a bleak and disturbing world filled with pain and suffering. Not heroes in capes. That's part of what makes it great, and part of what makes it weird, and part of what makes it horrifying. Number 2. What if Conan the Barbarian were stranded in the 20th century? And if you thought Wolverine and Conan fighting was weird, it just gets a whole lot weirder with this issue. However, I guess I should say that it gets a whole lot less weird, as the previous Conan What If we talked about was actually from the second volume of the series, as opposed to this issue that we're talking about, which is actually from the original series. In issue 43 of What If, we learn what would happen if Conan, instead of just coming to the modern day, was stranded there and stuck there. This What If was actually inspired by another fan favorite What If featured in issue 13. What if Conan the Barbarian walked the earth today? In this story, because Conan never gets teleported by lightning home, he becomes a criminal. Because I mean, why not, I guess? He's confused, he doesn't know what he's doing. However, after creating a gang and getting into some trouble, he attracts the attention of the Avengers. But Captain America sees more than just a brute, and believes Conan is just misguided, but he has a hero's heart, truly. He offers him a spot on the Avengers, and we actually never learn what Conan decides because the issue ends. Talk about a cliffhanger. I don't know if we'll ever come back. Do we ever come back to that? It's like, will I call him? Won't I call him? And then the Watcher's like, well, I would tell you, but I can't because that's a story for another time. Maybe if we ever do it. Number 1. Marville. Even saying the title sounds just like an experience. I don't even know where to start with Marville because this continuity feels so just like non-existent here. There's no through line. The story is meant to be about Kal-AOL, a play on Kal-El, a kid from the future who is sent back in time to save the world and to save himself. In the future, you see the world is about to end. Fortunately though, that doesn't happen. While Al doesn't have any powers, he somehow is moderately successful as a hero. After the world doesn't end, his parents send the time machine they originally sent him through back in time to pick him up. But Al decided to travel back in time to the beginning instead. There he meets maybe God, and also learns that Wolverine evolved from an otter and dinosaurs can talk. With every issue in this story, you ask yourself, how can it get any weirder? And then it somehow does that. Also, what's up with these covers? They're almost completely unrelated to the plot of the comics. I guess sexy ladies sell comics, and so who needs a plot was the thought process with Marville. At least with the covers. And maybe with the inside of it as well, because I don't really know what the plot is about. Number 10. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? What else would Spidey get up to? Well, in the long run, he basically ends up as a kind of television personality, an actor, and a producer. Spider-Man makes movies that he stars in as an action hero, but still keeps his identity a secret. In the end, he works toward promoting other vigilantes through films that he produces, and still ends up getting involved in crime fighting of sorts. A ton of villains in the form of the Sinister Six end up fighting against him. Well, really they end up fighting against Daredevil, and then Spider-Man's like, Daredevil, help me. But in the end, he's like, I gotta help because Daredevil's just one guy, and he doesn't really have superpowers in the same way that Spider-Man does. Included in this Sinister Six team-up is J. Jonah Jameson, who blames Spider-Man for the destruction of his life and his paper. In the end, Spider-Man realizes that he really mucked up by using his powers for gain instead of for good, which, fair. But he did have a really sweet cape, so there is that. Number 9. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? The story that started it all off. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four is what if that in theory doesn't really sound too crazy until you realize what happens as a result. Spider-Man initially attempted to impress the FF by breaking into the Baxter building to show off his skills and strength. This happened way back when in the original comics. However, in the main continuity reality, they weren't too impressed by his antics and initially denied him entry to the team. In this version of the story, however, Sue Storm feels compelled to give Spidey a chance and help make it work so that he can pay his and Aunt May's bills while also acting as a hero within the team. However, she later becomes jealous when she is left behind on a mission and Spider-Man gets to go, which, I mean, fair enough. Sue's like, hello, I'm here too. In the end, this causes her to run into the arms of Namor, who she then joins, leaving Reed Richards, and with Spider-Man taking her place on the team. Sue is also transformed into an Atlantean by a device Namor created just for this purpose, in case I guess it one day happened that Sue wanted to join him and become an Atlantean, and she can no longer as a result breathe oxygen. I just love how this story ends. I feel like it's kind of random, but it's also kind of great. I just ship Sue and Namor so much, that's the problem here. I'm into it. I'm like, yes, Sue, be Namor's conscience. Rule the underwater kingdom. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it and more what if videos, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, we got a what if playlist, so go click the playlist wherever it is on the screen. I don't know, is it here? Is it somewhere? Click it. Number 8. What if Thanos joined the Avengers? Just even saying this title feels weird. This one comes to us from the one-shot What If Infinity Thanos. In this story, Thanos ends up joining and being accepted into the Avengers while they face off with the Builders. He and the team succeeded in defeating their enemy, but at great cost, losing Captain America along the way. In a shocking twist of events, even more shocking than Thanos becoming an Avenger in my opinion, he also ends up taking up Cap's shield after he dies in battle, and almost seems to mourn his loss? It's a weird one, but if you want to see Thanos rub shoulders with Thor and Captain Marvel, then this is definitely the story for you. Number 7. What if you were Spider-Man? This is one of those very short stories that is summed up within basically a page, or in this case, 2 pages. 2 panels. Here, the what if question posed is what if you, yourself, were Spider-Man? I mean, if I were Spider-Man, I would probably carry my partner a little more securely while swinging around town, and I'd try to be a little kinder to myself when it came to all the self-guilt and blame that we usually see Spider-Man feeling over all of his failings. I'd definitely be doing weekly therapy sessions if I were Spider-Man. But don't think too hard about what you do differently or the same as Peter Parker, because the end to this what if is pretty hilarious and dark all at once. Because you are then greeted with a panel featuring a tombstone that says, "Here lies Spider-Man," where there is also a little space for you to fill in your name, and a bunch of villains surrounding it. Because of course, none of us average Joes could make it as Spidey. Har har. But also, it's probably true. I don't think I could actually make it as Spidey. Although we would have powers, right? I guess if we didn't have powers, we'd really be screwed though. Number 6. What if Helen Taylor had become Nova? This story takes place in the pages of issue 15 from Marvel's first What If volume, beginning in 1977. Here we get a few stories involving alternate characters taking up the mantle of Nova. One such character is a woman named Helen Taylor, who is basically a random civilian, redhead, and a wife. Or should I say a widow? She gets the power of Nova just after her husband is murdered in the streets in front of her after a mugging gone wrong. Helen swears to use her newfound power to get revenge, believing the powers are kind of an answer to her plea for some way to extract vengeance on the murderer, who we know as Willie DeBrow, or Willie DeBro, depending on how you want to say that. Nova sets off shaking down every criminal joint she can find in the city and making quick work of the Kingpin along her way to boot. The Fantastic Four manage to stop her and capture her to find out exactly what her powers are and where they came from and sort of why she's doing all this. And while this is going on, we learn that months ago, Willie perished in a car accident and has been dead ever since. What a twist. And if you're like, months ago, does that make sense? Yes, this story takes place over the course of months. I actually went back to look for that because I was like, that's so crazy, it's such a long period of time. A long period of time and only a few pages. Number 5. What if Ben Parker's nephew was Galactus? I love this story. This is a humorous what if story included in issue 3 of volume 2 of the What If series. In this story we find out what would have happened if Uncle Ben's nephew was Galactus instead of Peter. Galactus arrives home to find out that his Uncle Ben has been murdered, but he refuses to accept this, mourning the death of his uncle, who gave him his very first microscope. Oh no. With a mere thought, he vaporizes his uncle's murderer, reducing him to protoplasmic slime. Then he uses the power cosmic to restore his uncle to full health, even giving him powers and turning him into a Silver Surfer version of himself. Silver Uncle Ben? The story has a happy ending, with Aunt May satiating her nephew's hunger with a very hefty helping of wheat cakes. Oh, it's so great. It's so wholesome. Number 4. What if Wolverine had lived during the age of Conan the Barbarian? Or more specifically, what if Wolverine had fallen through a portal and ended up in the age of Conan the Barbarian and then lived on there? Yeah. This is what happens here, and of course, because this is what this story was always meant to be about, Wolverine and Conan end up going head to head, because we all know this is really a what if Wolverine and Conan fought each other story. In the end, Wolverine falls for Red Sonja because redheads, and Conan also ends up falling for Jean because redheads, after he falls back through a portal that sends him to Wolverine's time by accident. All in all, Conan ends up getting pretty messed up here, losing his hand, and then when he does return to Wolverine's time, without Logan's presence, Jean ends up going full Dark Phoenix and basically destroys the universe. Meanwhile, it's a happy ending for Wolverine, who stays in Conan's age and ends up with Red Sonja. What a strange but fantastic adventure. You can check this one out in issue 16 of the second What If volume, starting in 1989. Number 3. What if Spider-Man married Black Widow? This one is another one-panel story brought to us in volume 1's jam-packed humor issue, issue 34. Here we see a one-panel story that answers the question, what if Black Widow and Spider-Man ended up getting married? This is also just a strange question to pose, as these two, well, they don't have a ton of interaction in the comics, and they've never really been known to have any kind of long-lasting romance that could potentially lead to wedding bells. However, there could be a reason for that, it turns out. The What If uses a bit of wordplay for this scenario, implying that because Natasha is a Black Widow, she would end up eating Spider-Man. After all, that is what Black Widows try to do, in nature that is. I don't know if Black Widow could actually catch Spider-Man in the comics. I feel like he might be a little too fast, and he's also got his Spidey sense, but whatever, it's just a fun what if story, so taking it way too seriously. Number 2. What if the original Marvel Bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? In this what if, we get to imagine what it would be like if the original Marvel Bullpen had become the FF in real life, each being given their own superpowers matching the actual Fantastic Four team. Stan Lee as such becomes Mr. Fantastic, Flo Steinberg becomes Invisible Woman, or Invisible Girl as she was still known then, Sol Brodsky becomes the Human Torch, and Jack Kirby becomes the ever-loving Thing. The story is crazy over the top, and it doesn't seem to paint any of them in too kind of a light, to be honest, with the staff being transformed by a mysterious device delivered to the office, sent courtesy of the S people. But who are the S people? They end up becoming even more famous than their comic book counterparts, the original Fantastic Four, and eventually ask Prince Namor for help. They don't get turned back into their normal selves, but they do uncover the mystery of who the S people are. Any guesses? S, it turns out, stands for Skrull. Surprise. I mean, I was kind of surprised by that, because I was like, what starts with an S? And for some reason, Skrull did not come to my mind. Not reading a lot of Skrull stuff lately, obviously. Number 1. What if you were the Red Skull? I get the idea of what if you were Spider-Man, but what if you were the Red Skull? I mean, out of all the villains to pick, that is certainly a weird one to include here, Marvel. I did not see that coming. This story is also featured in issue 34 of the 1989 volume of What If, right under Spider-Man. Now, I see what they were trying to do, give you the option of a what if you were a hero or what if you were a villain, because, you know, that seems kind of fair. But I mean, given Red Skull's history, it just seems like a weird one to include when you could have picked, I don't know, a bunch of any other villains that exist that people might want to be more. Like, what about Doctor Doom or Green Goblin, which would make sense with Spidey, or even sometimes villain, sometimes hero, all-time thief, Black Cat. I mean, I would want to be Black Cat. Wouldn't you want to be Black Cat? She's so cool. Number 10. What if the X-Men had lost Inferno? This very chaotic and fire-filled demon horde-infested story comes to us from What If Volume 2, issue number 6. And we are starting it off hot, friends. This is quite a dark story. Here we get to imagine what the fate of the world would have been like had the X-Men failed in defeating Madeline Pryor during the events of Inferno. Instead, she and Sim take over the planet Earth, unleashing hordes of demons on it and ruling it together. However, the heroes who have survived their reign of terror manage to band together and, using their power, fight back. In the end, they do win the day, but not without casualties. Wolverine himself in the story ends up becoming the pet of the Goblin Queen, and Sim fully giving in to his feral rage and feeding on the innocent. Ugh. He only becomes free from the fog of his rage after he kills Kitty Pryde tragically and realizes the monster that he has become. Number 9. What if Captain America were revived today? 1983. Because there's another one of these from like, I think 1994, so yeah, but that's in volume 2. We're going to volume 1. There are actually a few different stories involving Captain America being revived in the modern day or simply evolving with time as it passed. So 1994, and I think there's also another one of them which might even be on this list. But in this What If from volume 1, issue 44, we get a darker take on what a modern day Cap could look like in the 80s. This version of the hero ends up turning America into a heavily monitored and policed country during his witch hunt for communists. Fortunately, as dark as that all is, we learn that this isn't the real Captain America but an imposter that took his place after he went MIA. The real Cap returns and battles it out with Imposter Cap, but in the end, the real Captain America turns to the people of America to undo all the damage done. He asks them to take responsibility, as while they were led to this point by a false version of him, they also allowed themselves to be led falsely. It's honestly a really good speech that even today rings true in a lot of ways, at least for me, and it provides the silver lining and shining hope for an otherwise pretty dark tale. Little grains of hope, that's all we need. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, if you want more what if lists, be sure to let us know by giving this a thumbs up, sharing it, doing all the things. Also, if you want more what if content, we do have a playlist now for that. Yay! Number 8. What if Wolverine killed the Hulk? In issue 31 of the 1977 What If series, we find out what would happen if instead, when Wolverine first met the Hulk, he had killed him. Wolverine goes on to celebrate his victory against the big green Goliath after killing him, having some drinks and throwing some punches like he usually does at the local tavern. However, in the end, things get out of hand and he accidentally kills one of the patrons in a rage. When he seeks help from the military to protect and defend him, they actually turn their back on Wolverine, and so he ends up joining the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. He becomes a sleeper agent for Magneto, infiltrating the X-Men. However, when Magneto finally plans on enacting his plan to defeat and capture the X-Men, Wolverine has a change of heart, feeling as though he has truly found acceptance and a family with the mutant team of heroes. He battles Magneto one-on-one, and the two kill one another in the end. It's a pretty tragic tale. Basically, all what ifs with Wolverine I feel like are usually pretty sad. Pretty sad or pretty dark. Number 7. What if Captain America had not vanished during World War II? See, another Captain America story because I love these. This story comes to us from issue 5 of volume 1, aka the 1977 What If series. While Captain America does not get trapped in the ice and Bucky never goes missing, presumed dead, only to become brainwashed and repurposed by the Soviet Union as the Winter Soldier, a worse fate seemingly awaits both of these heroes. Neither having ever disappeared, Steve goes on to fight as Captain America until he eventually retires from the mantle, becoming instead the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Bucky ends up taking his place, becoming the new Cap, as we have also seen happen in modern comics, and Rick Jones ends up becoming Buck's new sidekick, also going by the mantle of Bucky. Because I guess Rick or Ricky just doesn't have the same zing to it? Sadly though, Cap Bucky ends up dying on a mission, and Sharon Carter, Agent 13, who had hoped to settle down with Bucky after his final mission, blames Steve for his death. She actually accuses him of robbing him of his childhood and putting him in danger. Pretty intense. And then of course it ends with Rick volunteering to become the new Cap, so the deadly cycle it seems is destined to still continue in this timeline. You'd feel like after that all happened, Steve might be like, maybe we won't do that again, it didn't go great the last time. But he's just like, ah yes, Rick Jones, now you will be Captain America and probably die. What if the Green Goblin stole the Infinity Gauntlet? This story comes to us from the What If Infinity Dark Reign one-shot. Here we see Green Goblin dealing with a lot of family drama and trauma from his past. He steals the Infinity Gauntlet and not only uses it to defeat, well, all the heroes of planet Earth and beyond, but it's also revealed that his true motivation for doing all of this and pretty much everything that he's done is to win his father's approval. His father, who was always so unimpressed and who for a long time mistreated him, pushing Norman towards greatness or else. When Norman showcases his villainous accomplishments, it only causes his father to revile him even more though. Norman then decides to use his Infinity Gauntlet to snap and influence his father, making him proud of him instead. But this makes his father's love and approval feel pretty empty, especially when Norman learns that his altered dad actually really only loves him just because he's his son, and not for all that he has accomplished. Which you would think would be really nice, but to Norman he's like, that's infuriating, I hate that. Norman erases his father from existence, and in so doing, erases himself. Don't you hate when that happens? Number 5. Marvel Zombies Resurrection. While not an exact what if series, Marvel Zombies Resurrection definitely feels like a what if version of the Marvel Zombies world that imagines a completely new scenario involving zombies based on established Marvel lore, where Galactus becomes infected with a mysterious new virus that it turns out was created by the Brood, dun dun dun, to infect people more efficiently, turning them instead into zombies. The whole series from 2020 and the intro to it from 2019 that kind of explains all of the lore that you need to know to jump in is all pretty bleak, with only a few people on Earth making it out alive in the end, and still fighting basically just to survive after the world has pretty much been completely infected after Galactus' corpse is hurled to the Earth to be used as a kind of zombie creating bomb. But while the story is pretty dark in terms of all the great heroes that we lose, do not worry, at least Carol's Flurkin cat Chewie stays safe. Thank goodness. In case like me you read this and you were worried the whole time about that little fur baby, I was like, no, please don't let Chewie die, Chewie's so cute. Chewie is also a badass, so really there's no need to worry. Chewie's like one of the best fighters in this entire series, which I love. Number 4. What if Clint Barton killed Norman Osborn during Dark Reign? This what if comes answered in the What If Dark Reign one-shot. Here we get to see what could have happened had Clint Barton's plan to kill Norman Osborn actually come together. Clint himself ends up making a martyr out of Osborn though, unfortunately, and becomes a wanted man in the process. One civilian decides to take the matter of justice into his own hands, calling out the assassin, Clint Francis Barton. And if he doesn't show himself, he threatens to blow up the entire Sunday Inn and all the innocent people that are inside it. Hawkeye does show up though and attempts to talk the man down, but surprisingly the man pulls a gun and shoots Clint point blank to death rather than surrender. He is taken away, and in the end Hammer remains in control under Deputy Director, likely now full director actually, Victoria Hand. Basically, if Hawkeye had actually killed Norman Osborn, it would be bad, I think, in the long run. I think that's what we learned. Number 3. What if the Kingdom of Cain? In What If issue 94 out of the 1989 series, also known as Volume 2, we get to visit a world destroyed by the Sentinels. Oh goody. The Sentinels did not only take out all of mutant kind supposedly, but also killed all of Earth's mightiest heroes besides, and its general population of non-powered individuals who were killed by high levels of radiation that the Sentinels emitted. The only one to survive all this destruction is Juggernaut, who wanders the Earth for years reminiscing on his past and all of his wrongdoings, and feeling unbearably lonely all the while. Poor Juggernaut. Magneto shows up and confirms that everything that has come to pass is Juggernaut's fault because he killed Professor X, which was basically the catalyst event for this chain reaction of destruction that has now come to pass. Juggernaut finds and kind of falls into a secret bunker as a result of his fight with Magneto, where he learns that some mutants survived and are actually hiding out. Yay! When they ask him to leave them be though, he refuses, only to learn that this was an attempt to protect themselves against the radiation, which he is now let in by breaking into the bunker, infecting them and ultimately sentencing them to death. So, it's really sad. Juggernaut's like, I'm lonely, I just want to talk to you. And they're just like, you just killed us, so thanks for that. He's like, wow. I ruin everything, this is terrible. Number 2. What If the Traitor? In this alternate tale that comes to us from the 1989 volume of What If issue -1, we get to see what would happen if Trevor Fitzroy went back in time to try and convince Professor X to never create the X-Men. Although Bishop travels back in time to try and stop Fitzroy, it doesn't end up working out. Fitzroy shows the Professor of the future to come and all the war and prosecution that mutants will suffer. When Professor X meets Bishop, he inquires of Jean's fate and learns that she perishes, but that he and his X-Men remain a symbol of hope for the people. Unable to accept the dark future that awaits, however, Professor X seemingly agrees, despite Bishop's pleas, to never let the X-Men form, and Bishop ends up being locked up in prison in the past, with both Fitzroy and Bishop believing the other is the traitor. But who's really the traitor? Number 1. What If Spider-Man Back in Black? This story reimagines what would have happened had MJ ended up being shot by the Kingpin's hitman instead of Aunt May. Mary Jane as such does not end up in intensive care hanging to life by a thread, but instead dies pretty much instantly. This makes Peter lose control, going into a dark rage unlike any we've ever seen. He doesn't just plan on scaring and potentially finishing the Kingpin if MJ dies, because I mean she's already dead, but instead he plans on just straight up setting out to kill whoever was responsible for the hit, which he of course does find out was still Kingpin in this reality. Donning his black costume, he heads out planning to put an end to Kingpin once and for all, despite Aunt May and Iron Man trying to stop him and calm him down. In the end, Peter succeeds in killing Kingpin, Aunt May basically disowns him, and Iron Man has him arrested for murder, citing the Superhero Registration Act. Peter blames Iron Man for all this mess, by the way, demanding a trial with a jury, and Iron Man denies any wrongdoing, claiming Peter made his choice. Number 10. What if Jane Foster had found the Hammer of Thor? This one isn't so strange for the premise, but it's more bizarre because of where the premise took us in the end. This is a story we've also seen adapted to the main continuity, though fortunately it does not quite share this same ending, which I'm pretty happy about, to be honest. Jane ends up finding the Hammer of Thor and becoming the goddess of storms, taking up the mantle Thordis. Lady Sif, missing Thor, ends up finding and falling in love with Donald Blake, who is later revealed of course to be the true Thor when Odin asks Thordis to return his hammer to him. As thanks for her service, however, Odin makes Jane a goddess. However, as Jane was in love with Donald, who is now Thor and is in love with Lady Sif, her heart is broken and she has to be returned to her mortal self because of this. But Odin has a better solution and proposes to Jane, who agrees, to marry him, and then they all live happily ever after. With Jane finding that those very qualities she both admired and loved in the mortal Don Blake are also to be found in the father of immortal Thor. My goodness. That's a very strange ending to that story. How about instead of being with my son, you be with me, his father, haha. Okay, Odin, what? I feel like I like it better when Odin just doesn't really like Jane. I think that works more. Is that weird? Number 9. What if the Avengers were the last superheroes on Earth? This story allows us to imagine what the world would be like if all the superpowered beings on Earth were defeated by the Avengers. At the behest of the Scarlet Centurion, the Avengers attempt to eradicate all superpowered beings, including themselves. In the end, after all threats have been defeated, they decide to disband, being the last ones with powers, in order to usher in an era of peace on Earth. They all go off to live their own normal-ish lives. Thor returns to Asgard, Tony returns to being a billionaire playboy in Las Vegas, only to realize that it doesn't really bring him any joy and actually considers entering into politics. And Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym actually seem to find quite a bit of happiness, going off and getting married and focusing on their time with one another, which It's kind of sweet. I guess if they weren't superheroes, it would work out pretty well for them. Scarlet Centurion does return to threaten Earth and forces the Avengers to come together one more time, but after defeating him, they once again go their separate ways back into retirement. And they also kind of question, like, if being a superhero is actually a bad thing, because does it create more problems than it solves? Just a quick reminder, if you love these what if lists, I personally love bringing them to you because these stories are amazing. Be sure to show us that love by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing, commenting, subscribing, all the things. Number 8. What if the Gamma Bomb spawned 1,000 Hulks? This story comes to us from volume 2 of the What If series that started back in 1989. In issue 71, we get to imagine a reality where instead of just one Hulk, or the members of the Hulk family plus Hulk, we had 1,000 of them, which I would say is ultimately too many Hulks. In this story, it was the bombing on Hiroshima that resulted in these thousands of Hulks coming into existence, survivors of the attack that were basically mutated, so they became Hulks. In the end, Bruce Banner, aka Hulk, who of course goes on to become the Hulk in the story, must attempt to stand up against this army and attempt to defeat it with the help of some friends. Number 7. What if Betty Brant, instead of Spider-Man, had been bitten by the radioactive spider? This one comes to us from a 3-part story and is simply one story within that. It is from the original What If series volume 1 from 1997, issue number 7. Here, Betty Brant, instead of Peter Parker, is the one bitten by the radioactive spider, gaining spider-like abilities. While the story isn't a strange premise at all, like I don't think it's weird for Betty Brant to become, a version of Spider-Man, what really makes this one stand out for me in terms of its weirdness is Betty's costume here, which is it's something. It's also odd that in this alternate reality, Betty happens to be the only alternate person to become Spider-Man that manages to survive the ordeal, with both John Jameson and Flash Thompson in this issue, who are featured in the other 2 stories, dying as a result of gaining spider powers and attempting to use them. Instead of Betty choosing not to pursue the thief that kills Peter's Uncle Ben, she simply is unable to because she used up all her web fluid posing for pictures for Peter. Which is a whole other thing, but also, wait, can't you just go after them anyways? Don't you have superpowers? It doesn't matter that your web fluid is gone. Anyways, she still blames herself for Uncle Ben's death and decides to quit being Spider Lady, which I think is a little harsh. I feel like she wasn't really super responsible for that, but I guess she could have gone after him. I don't know why she didn't do that. Be like, use your super strength, climb on walls, do any of the other things you can do. Number 6. What if Submariner never regained his memories? This story allows us to glimpse into an alternate reality where Namor never met the Human Torch and never ended up regaining his memories and returning to Atlantis, learning that he was the true ruler of the underwater kingdom. Instead, the Submariner remains unaware of his true heritage and ends up joining a ship's crew, finding himself inexplicably drawn to the sea. I wonder why. The captain of the ship, Namor's friend McCandless, ends up being mutineered against and goes overboard while injured when he believes they found the lost entrance to the center of the earth. Namor, or Mr. Smith as he's known, follows after him and ends up being retrieved from the ice-cold water by Inuits later on. They end up worshipping Namor as the Lord of the Frozen Sea, along with frozen Captain America, who they worship as the Lord of the Frozen Ice. And Namor's like, I guess this is my life now, and I'm pretty good with it. So I guess it all worked out in the end, and now he just gets to be the Lord of the Sea really far up north where it's cold. Cool, I guess? Number 5. What if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? While all of these stories are based on things that actually did happen, this is also based on something that did happen, so if you think it sounds weird because it's just so random, that is a thing that actually happened, where Iron Man and Doctor Doom in main continuity traveled back to the time of Arthurian legend. However, rather than getting back home in this version while Doom manages to leave, he leaves Iron Man trapped in the past. Oh no! A weird turn of events ends up leaving Tony Stark as the ruler and king of England following the death of his friend King Arthur. Tony actually proves to be a great king and lives out his days there in the past just as an accomplished and celebrated ruler. I actually wonder what effect that would have had on the present, because I feel like everything would be very different if Tony Stark were the king of England. This all goes down in issue 33 of the 1997 What If series, so you can check that out if you want. Number 4. What if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? One of them is just being a giant brain. It's true. Actually, overall, these powers feel very Doom Patrol meets X-Men in my opinion. In this alternate story, when subjected to cosmic radiation, the FF get completely different powers than what each member has in main continuity. Johnny becomes a robot, Ben gets dragon-like wings, Reed is just a disembodied brain, admittedly not a very great power, and Sue ends up with the least original powers, getting Reed's old powers instead. The ability to stretch her body like Taffy or Silly Putty. Really, I feel like Sue always gets sort of like the worst part of these stories whenever she's in a what if. Hers are always so like quick or just so kinda lame. And I'm like, dang, why doesn't Invisible Woman get some cool stuff? I think she was still Invisible Girl at this time though, maybe that's why. Number 3. What if Aunt May instead of her nephew Peter had been bitten by that radioactive spider? This story reimagines what would have happened if once again it was not Peter Parker who received the fateful radioactive spider bite, but instead was his elderly Aunt May. This is from a humor issue, so you know it's gonna be weird and you know it's gonna be great. And it is. Aunt May here ends up getting bit after realizing that Peter had left his lunch at home on the day he and his class were meant to visit the exhibit at the Science Institute. And if you're like, Amanda, it's not called the Science Institute. Seriously, if you go to this issue, that is what is written on the building in the Science Institute. Of what? We don't know. She successfully delivers the forgotten lunch to Peter, cottage cheese and mashed string beans, but ends up feeling unwell on her way home, and finds that she has developed superpowers. She makes her own costume, becoming Spider-Maam, and ends up facing off in this story with the ridiculous villain, Leapfrog. Because that's just how it goes. Number 2. What if the Fantastic Four all had the stretching powers of Mr. Fantastic? Oh boy, I love this issue because we get 4 stories where we get to imagine what it would be like if multiple members of the FF shared basically the same powers. And in the one where they all get stretching powers, they just never end up becoming the Fantastic Four because their collective power is just considered, well, kinda lame. Sue in fact insists that they never let anyone know of their powers because she feels like, and I quote, a freak. Both Sue and Ben feel as though the stretching powers are ridiculous, monstrous, ugly, and dumb, while Reed and Johnny actually think they're pretty neat and even could be useful. Still, Sue and Ben's way of thinking wins out, so the Fantastic Four never become a superhero team. The end. Number 1. What if Thanos had changed Galactus into a human being? I really love this What If story personally. It comes to us from, once again, one of the humor issues of What If, so you know it's gonna be a riot. In this story, Thanos turns Galactus into a human being in order to defeat him, and Galactus ends up on Earth with no memory of who he was or is. He does, however, happen to look a lot like Elvis Presley, and even sings and plays like him too. He meets a woman named Gertrude who introduces him to the works of Presley, and Galactus is basically convinced that he must indeed be like an amnesiac version of Elvis Presley, returned from the dead. He goes on to have a successful music career, and when his memories are later restored by Adam Warlock, who also offers to return his power to him, he actually decides instead to stay on Earth and live out his life here as Elvis with Gertrude and her son Toby. Which, I mean, fair enough, that sounds like a pretty good life.